Welcome back to the Naval Gaze. I'm Aaron Terrell. She is Tali Bots. And you are joining us once again. Well, this is for the fourth installment of our project of kind of talking about, trying to educate about autosexuality. And we thought it was high time we dedicate an entire episode specifically to the autosexuality that most people know and do not love, which is autogynephilia. Um, uh, that the Boogeymen is what we called it. It's kind of how it's how this is understood by both sides of the aisle, and we kind of want to say why you're all wrong. Um, and we're also gonna do an episode later on about specifically about autoandrophilia, but autogynephilia just felt more urgent. There's a lot of scapegoating of autogynephilia, which is I don't know, not just unfair to the people who experience it, but really disastrous for those of us who are trying to clear away the just the bullshit that obscures what this actually is. In a way that people can actually see themselves in it, see their son, husband, friend, whomever and they're not going to see that in the monster that is being presented. They're not going to see their loved one in the monster that is being presented as what the autogynephilic experience is. And yeah, how do we combat the ideology unless people can see, the human experience underneath what is driving the vast majority of, at least for this episode, the males, is what we are covering here today. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and that's so important for the people on our side. If the only option, if we believe that this experience is real, even for the people who think that it's some type of perversion, if you believe that it's real and it happens at all, then the only options for these people cannot be you are a deviant and a pervert, or you are actually just have a woman's soul trapped inside a man's body. Because if autogynephilia does actually function like a sexual orientation, which means that it's going to be pervasive throughout someone's life, then their repression for people who have it to a severe enough level will be impossible, and they're going to have to cling on to something to be able to manifest it in society. And so we are proposing, and we're not the first, but we are proposing a third perspective, which is this is an atypical sexuality, and when left unchecked and when fed by different social narratives like trans and like born in the wrong body, can result in really negative antisocial behaviors, but it doesn't have to. And in fact, most autogynephiles are normal, thoughtful, maybe even particularly sensitive individuals who don't want to hurt anybody and can live their entire lives without doing so. And so we need to make that option available to more people, because right now most people don't even know that autogynephilia might explain what they're going through. And this is really most evident if you look onto r/asktransgender on Reddit. You can barely go 5 posts without a young male talking about a clearly autogynephilic experience and asking people, does this mean I'm a woman? And so they haven't even, they are describing autogynephilia. They're talking about not really feeling like necessarily feminine, but really strongly desiring to become a woman, thinking about themselves as a woman in sexual ways, getting euphoria or even physical arousal when putting on women's clothes. And they literally have no idea that there's already a framework that exists to explain what these feelings are for them. And so we want to talk about what these feelings are and where some of the sexologists and psychologists think these feelings might come from.
Yeah, and we also need to frame that in so that's like how it's understood for the people who experience it within these trans subcultures, how it's framed, and more even more culturally broadly. The experience of autogynephilia is just kind of understood as an experience of woman gender, of having this woman brain, this woman soul, and transition is the best solution, yada yada. To not accommodate is bigotry and hateful. So that's how most of the culture understands the autogynephilia. They don't know it as autogynephilia. They just know that that desire to be female, etc. In more kind of couched language, let's say, is how it's understood in the mainstream culture and in the specifically in trans culture. But I think a good chunk of our audience listening here today has a equally incorrect understanding of what autogynephilia is, which is that it's basically a fetish that develops from consumption of porn, is what a lot of people seem to believe. And it's just not true. It is a basically that I think the most helpful way to understand it is as a sexual orientation. And when that orientation is framed as this this gender experience, well, that's a lot more. That's a much preferable way of viewing the experience as this is just what being a trans woman feels like. This is normal, and it also gives them exactly what they want, which is to be able to transition and live as women. When it's being framed as it's not even just a fetish, but almost like conspiratorial, like this master plan to override women's boundaries and women's rights and things like this, is like that's even more disconnected. Not just so people are going to have a difficult time understanding their experience as being like a perversion or a paraphilia or a fetish, but a lot of people on our side go even further in that kind of a really derogatory framing of this experience, and basically see it as like this men's rights movement to basically trample on the rights and boundaries of women and
children.
And children, yes. And I feel like that's equally as I don't know where I'm going with this. Basically, it's just really unhelpful.
No, it's extremely unhelpful, and I think I want to address that head on, because you're right. It is being framed from our side, from the gender critical space, as a conspiracy, basically, that if you follow the money, right, if you look at the top, what do you see? You see all of these autogynephiles, and this is more obvious to them because these are males who transitioned most of the time later in life, married to women, and so it's got all of the flags that help them identify this person's trans experience as autogynephilia. And so they're saying, look, when you look at all of this, these are all autogynephiles. The problem with this scapegoating sort of propaganda is that it, like a lot of successful propaganda, it's based in some truth. A lot of the trans women at the top pushing this politically and socially and whatever are autogynephilic, because most trans women are autogynephiles, because most people experiencing gender dysphoria are experiencing because of this inverted sexuality. Autogynephilia is not a political movement. In fact, let me take that one step further. The autogynephiles that all of these people are pointing to and identifying as the cabal, basically, as leading the conspiracy, reject the label of autogynephile. They don't call their other autogynephilic friends AGPs. They reject it. These are the people who are either the people leading the charge are either unself-aware autogynephiles, or sort of in denial, right, are the ones who rejected and call Blanchard, a pseudoscientist and a bigot and all of these things. So no, this idea that if we talk about or promote autogynephilia, it's actually feeding the interests of this cabal, of this conspiracy of autogynephiles. That's just not true, because as someone noted, was this Anne Lawrence? Autogynephilia is the love that
Really would
that
rather
wishes
wish
you
didn't
wouldn't
speak
say its name. Yeah, exactly. People talking about autogynephilia as the cause for gender dysphoria and transgender identity are the enemies of the people at the head of the cabal that everyone points to.
Right. Understanding that what you're experiencing is quintessentially a male experience, and it's a paraphilic male experience, is the antithesis of indulging the fantasy, because it completely it just takes away that whole woman foundation from foundationally, and obviously they want to understand their experience as being in essence a female experience that they happen to be having in a male body, and it's the male. Anyway, but yeah, exactly right. Like the speaking about autogynephilia, telling people who are trans women, explaining to them that they are autogynephilic is not something that they want to hear. And people have a lot of aversion to this information being presented in a in kind of a scientific way that is grounded in reality. And then I guess I'm going to keep both sides in this. Our side, the gender critical side of all this, is also averse to the experience of autogynephilia being spoken about in a scientific and humane way, which is what obviously we are trying to do. But neither side wants this information spoken about in a way that's kind of grounded in reality.
Yeah.
And especially our side doesn't want it spoken about in a way that humanizes this experience. But you and I are both in agreement that humanizing it is the only way that you can kind of extricate people from the ideology. So
it's also the only way to talk about it honestly.
Right.
Because so many people, so many autogynephilic males and what we believe to be autoandrophilic females are really suffering.
Yeah.
They don't want to be this way. Whether that means they don't want to accept themselves as having a paraphilia or having an atypical sexuality, or if it just means they don't want to wish they were a woman. They feel very, very conflicted about this. Especially because for so many of them, their desire to become a woman is so tied up in their reverence and love and admiration of other women. And so they don't want to be a creep. Yeah. They don't want to be an intrusion. And so humanizing it, we do think that that's necessary for sort of our political aims of ending the gender nonsense that we have and the pseudoscientific medical industry of trans that we have right now, but we also think it's just the only way to actually explain this experience. And that brings me to Ray Blanchard, and maybe we should take a step back now and really talk about what is autogynephilia, where does the word come from, what is it meant to describe. The term autogynephilia was coined in 1989 by Ray Blanchard, who was a psychologist at the University of Toronto, and he started studying transsexualism in the 80s and through the frameworks that already existed. And so there were different sexologists and psychologists over the decades who had created different typologies. Some of them saw 2 types, some of them saw 3 types, some of them saw 5 types of what they saw as different types of males, mostly, who were desiring to physically transition or change their legal documents to be to the opposite sex. And basically, Ray Blanchard found when looking at both the history, the case studies that some of these older psychologists had recorded, and also the the clients, the people who were coming into the gender clinic that he worked at, he found that their experiences really clustered around two types, which he classified as the homosexual type and the non-homosexual type. And so the homosexual type was labeled HSTS, the homosexual transsexuals, and this other type, the non-homosexuals, the heterosexuals, the bisexuals, and the asexuals, were labeled as autogynephilics. And autogynephilia, the word basically means love of oneself as a woman. And Ray Blanchard says in his own words that the reason that he created this new name, autogynephilia, to describe this experience is because the only terms that they had available at that time that had been recorded throughout history was transvestic fetishism. And he found that while basically all cases of transvestic fetishism can be accounted for by autogynephilia, not all experiences of autogynephilia include that explicit fetishistic component, and that limiting your understand that in fact calling it transvestic fetishism was preventing people from properly understanding what this actual experience is for these people. And so, yeah, he coined the term autogynephilia, and since then, this has just been basically replicated over and over again. And again, once you kind of familiarize yourself with what these patterns look like, it's very clear that that's still going on today. All you need to do is go on Reddit and look at how trans people talk about themselves and their own experiences. And so something that I really want to highlight is all of the ways that Ray Blanchard and autogynephilia are really misunderstood, and how people on both sides of this are being intellectually dishonest as far as I'm concerned. And so you have the trans activists who say that autogynephilia is a slur, basically. It is pseudoscientific, and it was created to both pathologize trans people and to mark them in society as sexual deviants, the same way that they'll say, the same way that homosexuals were labeled in the DSM, right, as sexual deviants. And so they claim that Ray Blanchard, is a bigot and a pseudoscientist. However, they fail to acknowledge that Blanchard's theory of autogynephilia was based very heavily in the work of one of their idols, Magnus Hirschfeld. And Magnus Hirschfeld already knew, back in Germany in the early 1900s, that transsexualism was very closely linked to sexuality. And so Hirschfeld didn't see it as two types, but he saw it as these distinct types of sexualities, basically, that drive males to want to transition. He saw the homosexual type, the heterosexual type, the bisexual type, and the asexual type. It was only Blanchard who, when running statistical analyses of these different patterns across these populations, saw that actually the three non-homosexual types cluster around the same thing, that they're actually better understood as one experience and not three distinct experiences. But Blanchard's work pulls directly from Magnus Hirschfeld, who, again, trans people very closely relate to. Trans people talk about the trans genocide and how trans people were literally genocided by the Nazis because they went and they burned down Magnus Hirschfeld's library and all of this stuff. And so there's this intellectual incoherence, I guess, or just cognitive dissonance for the people who say Blanchard is a bigot, when Blanchard started his research where Magnus Hirschfeld ended his, essentially. And then on the other side of that, you have the gender criticals. You have the people in me and Aaron's world who proclaim reverence for Blanchard, and they think that he was obviously correct. They acknowledge that AGP exists because they demonize it. This is their scapegoat as to why transgender ideology and queer theory is being shoved down everyone's throats and into the schools, and why they're medicalizing children. And so they acknowledge the existence of AGP. However, they insist that it is a fetish, that this is a cross-dressing fetish, basically gone awry, they believe that it can be sort of caused by exposure to certain types of pornography, and that it could potentially be unlearned if the person deals with the trauma and the pornography poisoning that they experienced as an adolescent or as a young adult, that they can give up these fetishistic tendencies that they have. But these people, they're not showing a lot of appreciation for or understanding of Blanchard's theory, if that's what they believe. Because, like I said several minutes ago, Blanchard coined the term autogynephilia specifically because transvestic fetishism did not encompass the experience of this inversion, of this gender dysphoria, of this desire to transition. And so the people on our side insisting that Blanchard is both correct and that AGP is just a fetish aren't listening to Blanchard. Yeah.
No, well put. That's exactly correct. And I think what both are missing is what the experience of autogynephilia is. So like you said, that Blanchard put all three of what had previously been understood as unique presentations in strictly heterosexual, bisexual, or asexual males who experience this desire to be female, and this is like kind of the quintessential core, essentially, of their sexual experience is to be female or feminine, and what that is, as I have come to understand it, is what don't know that it was Blanchard who coined the term erotic target location error or erotic target identity inversion, but it's essentially, and I don't want this to sound like disparaging terminology, but it's like a mislearning of the erotic target. It's a rather than being attracted to for a male, rather than being attracted to actual women, so having an allogynephilic sexuality, see the glossary and the description. So rather than having an allogynephilic attraction to women, their sexuality automatically, without their consent, let's put it that way, backfires it to themselves. They believe that it's an automatic, I should be that which I externally find attractive. And like you said, at the beginning, is like, this is not something that anyone who has this experience wants to have. A lot of the advice seeking online that's completely anonymous is, how do I fix this? How do I stop doing this? How do I become a normal straight man? Like, they don't want to have it, but it is that the automatic process of their sexuality is needing to be that which they are externally attracted to. And different people are going to manifest this in different ways. So for some, it's completely asexual in that they are their only target. They're their only sexual target. They're not externally attracted to women. They have no desire to be with actual women. They just their entire sexuality is about being that woman. But then autogynephilia quite often manifests as bisexuality or pseudo-bisexuality or meta-androphilia, so an attraction to other men who's subconsciously or otherwise whose role is essentially to help bring about the female sense of self, the woman identity, by way of engaging in sex with men that way. And then other autogynephiles are just as much or more attracted to actual physical women in the real world, as much or more than they are to being the woman themselves. And so that's why you've got these three different: the asexual, the bisexual, and the exclusively heterosexual. It is all the same root experience. It's just how their allosexuality manifests, or how they feel most comfortable or most aroused by kind of engaging sexually. But at its root, it is the self as a woman, and the rest are kind of somewhat incidental, shall we say.
Yeah, and I think we believe that factors that can play into whether someone presents as the sort of traditional heterosexual autogynephile, the traditional bisexual, or the traditional asexual autogynephile, will have to do with a few things. Number one, just sort of the severity of their autogynephilia. And so there is an understanding amongst the sexologists and the psychologists that some people just sort of have like an itch. And again, we see this in the presentation both throughout history and today. There are both trans people who like do almost nothing to change themselves physically, but the sexual component is there for them. And we see sort of what people classically call transvestites, like people who aren't really have no interest in even being perceived by others necessarily or accepted by others as women, but they want to embody womanhood in some way. And so we think that the severity of someone's autogynephilic tendencies can influence that, and also this concept of autoandrophobia, which is disgust of their own male body. And so this, we think, contributes pretty heavily to this could contribute pretty heavily to asexuality, right? And so their inability to be sexual with other people might be sort of low sex drive, might be because they're the only target of their arousal, but it also might be because they are so profoundly uncomfortable in their sexed body that interacting with anybody sexually is dysphoria inducing. It causes them to literally dissociate. So we think that that's probably playing a big role there in some of the different manifestations. And I think the bisexuality thing is interesting too, because this is a sticking point where people will claim that someone can't be autogynephilic if they're bisexual, if they have sort of sincere attraction to the same sex as well. But it's not, I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that it's still, that their attraction to the same sex is in reference to their idea of themselves as a woman. Because for some of these men, it's not just that they're receiving, let's say, anal sex from partners, and so that allows them to sort of be the bottom in that way, but they'll even express like excitement about giving blowjobs to men and stuff like that. But it's, in all of these scenarios, they are visualizing themselves as the women doing this. And so they might be really aroused by men, basically, because that is that's part of their experience of being a woman, right? Is like, and embodying their sexiness as a woman and sort of the power of femininity in that way. So yeah, we think that these things sort of explain some of these different presentations that we see when most people, it's most stereotypically associated with heterosexuality, because that's what this essentially is, right? It's auto heterosexuality. All of these presentations, even the asexual presentation where they're not showing any attraction to women, all of these presentations include attraction to oneself as a woman and desire to embody a woman.
Yep. And that's what, so many people, especially on our side, on the gender critical side, are getting wrong, because they do think in terms of that kind of characterized version that a lot of the trans activists have pushed forward, that if you're not exclusively heterosexual, then you're somehow not autogynephilic. And so a lot of people on the gender critical side believe that as well. They believe that anyone who hasn't displayed a lifetime of only heterosexual relationships, only relationships with women, that therefore they must be like not AGP. It's almost like they do the opposite of what, so like Ray Blanchard, right? He's like, there's the homosexuals and then the non-homosexuals. It's like on the gender criticals, they've done the opposite, where it's like there's the strictly heterosexuals and then there's the
non-heterosexuals. Yeah.
Right.
No, totally.
And homosexuals. Yeah.
And I don't want to dwell on this too much because it's not specifically the topic of this conversation, but we are seeing that happening, I would say, to the detriment of scientific clarity. We are seeing the collapsing of non-heterosexual orientations into one thing, and we're
Yeah.
calling it all gay, or
Yep.
we're calling it all same-sex attracted.
Is
And
the
again, I
one
think these
downfall
words
I'd
are
say of the Cass report. Sorry,
totally,
off topic.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. And again, like culturally, I think it's fine to use these same words for things because that's all these things really are. They're self-identifiers, you know. They're part of how people incorporate their sense of identity. But it's not helpful in understanding what the experience is for these people when we call everyone non-heterosexual. Both the people who there's people who call themselves bisexual but have never had same-sex experiences. Doesn't mean they're lying, but this is
Mhm.
relevant information. There are people who call themselves exclusively homosexual, like myself, sort of, right, who have had opposite sex relations. Again, they're not wrong for saying that, but that's relevant information. And so we're
Mhm.
collapsing all of this down to our detriment, because I think it's politically convenient,
Mhm.
and it makes people feel better. I know for a fact that was like a very galvanizing thing for me, sort of jumping into the gender critical space, is when I realized, like, holy shit, they're sterilizing gay kids. That was like, oh, that touches my identity. You know, I'm married to a woman, you know, we were once gay children. And they are taking away this ability for homosexuals, for gay people who identify as gay, to have adult sexual organs and to have the ability to procreate. And so I think that is like a really powerful talking point. But it's a talking point. And again, and
Yeah.
it's sort of true. It's sort of true, but
Yep.
it's because we're misunderstanding where this sexual identity comes from and what it actually means.
Yep. Yep. No, I agree. It's a great talking point to get people through the door. And then once
Yes.
they're through the door, then it's time we got to get into the
The
nuance
nitty-gritty.
and the honesty, yeah, of the experience, especially if we're coming from a place of trying to help the young people impacted by the ideology in a therapeutic manner. Like if that's where the sloganeering no longer has any functional purpose. Propaganda is useful, like the sloganeering, the save the gay kids. Yes, that is very useful and poignant, and it gets people. But once once that attention is grabbed, it's time to be kind of honest and in depth about the details that are leading people to this about what is actually the appeal of transition. Let's say that. And simply being homosexual does not explain the appeal of transition. And that's obviously what we're trying to do here with this show, is to explain, what is the appeal of transition, and hope people can come to understand that.
Right. The people on our side need to understand what the appeal to transition is, and the people who are experiencing this gender confusion need to understand why they are feeling compelled to transition. You said something earlier that I'm so proud of myself. I worked so hard to not interrupt you because you were on a good track, but I really want to respond to it. And you said a lot of these people on the online forums, they're talking about their experience and their confusion with maybe cross-dressing, or feeling really like a woman and getting to dress up whatever when they're alone, and all of these things. And they are asking, like Aaron said, like, how do I get rid of this? Basically, they feel ashamed about it. They even worry, like, does this mean I'm not really trans? A lot of them will say, do I just have a kink? Am I fetishizing transness? A lot of them will say, because they don't have an understanding of what they're going through. And again, this is why autogynephilia needs to be better understood, because for a lot of these people, they wish it will go away. And so when it doesn't, they just take it to mean, well, it wasn't a phase for me, right? Even when I stop watching the porn, even when I do X, Y, or Z, these feelings are still here. And so they are going to take the option that says this is just the normal experience for a trans woman, and trans woman is normal gender variance of human psychobiology, and yeah, you are #valid. And they're going to go down the path, even if it's not necessary for them, even if they might have been able to live a much more integrated life as their sex. They're going to take that path because it allows them to manifest it in some way, and at least someone is making sense of it for them. They can at least relate to whenever someone writes about this in these forums, 12 other people chime in to say that was exactly my experience. And now I'm 4 years on estrogen, right? And so we need to present another option. And that's why I also, I can't really understand the demonization of Phil Illy in this conversation, because he's an example of someone who's doing his best to integrate his autogynephilia into his male identity in a way that doesn't transgress on the boundaries of others, and in a way that is natural or non-medically assisted.
And not
that
self-deluding.
and most importantly, yeah, not self-deluding. And so it's really like an ethical responsibility to present this option to people. So at the very least, even if they decide that they're going to transition, that their autoandrophobia is so severe that they can't exist in their body anymore, at least they're going in understanding that what they're having is a male experience, that what they're doing is a man changing his body, right, to more closely approximate the opposite sex. And that seems very important for two reasons. A, to fight this culture war, basically. The biggest impediment right now is the trans women are women, trans men are men. Is like we just can't even break through that block and talk about sex. We can't even talk about the biological reality of sex. So that's the first one. I forgot the second one that I was going to say, but it's okay. We don't need to dwell on it too much. Yeah.
I wanted to, this concept of autoandrophobia, I think, is really important. And that is, I think, what most people, when people say gender dysphoria, I think a more useful term would be autoandrophobia, or in my case, autogynephobia, right? So it's aversion to your body's, your sexed body, that we believe is, and seems to be, a facet, an extension, a byproduct of auto heterosexuality. And this, I think, this specifically, since we're talking about autogynephilia, autoandrophobia is, I think, often misunderstood to be internalized homophobia. So a lot of people on the gender critical side are hearing these experiences of young men and detransitioners, or just trans women, or just dysphoric males in general, and how they were very uncomfortable with the idea of being gay men. But the reality of the situation is they were compelled to seek out male sexual partners because that was an extension of their autogynephilic attraction to the self as a woman. But because they don't have an innate kind of core attraction to men, that the feeling is kind of being grossed out by male on male sexual encounters. And this is reframed as internalized homophobia when it's not internalized homophobia. That's a different experience. This is autoandrophobia. This is aversion, not aversion, but aversion to the self as male, and desiring to be female, and seeking out, those pseudo bisexual encounters with men,
or leaning into their metasexuality.
Yeah. Because for some. Well, so I think for those who, okay, so let's step back, because this is something I did want to touch on. Is for some, some people, I think for a lot, definitely the case with females, as we've spoken about, but also for some males, they're able at a young age to kind of mold their desire to be female into genuine androphilic attraction, into genuine attraction to men or boys, it would be starting with, and then they grow up to ultimately be gay men as a result of kind of turning their autogynephilia into a genuine external attraction to males. So yeah, our theory is this is very, very common in females, the metasexuality experience. Less common in males, but it does definitely happen. I think for these are not the kind of men who then interpret their desire to transition as internalized homophobia, because they don't have that androphobia. They've essentially, for the most part, kind of avoided developing autoandrophobia.
So
Looking down a rabbit hole. Let me pull
no,
me
no,
out
no.
here.
Well, I guess like this will be an interesting place for us to potentially disagree. And I think I'm limited by the fact that I don't experience either of I don't experience autogynephobia in the way that you do, in the way that my wife certainly does. See, yeah, so I'm gonna push back. I don't know that autogynephobia or autoandrophobia always has to generalize out. And so I actually think that
Right,
for
right.
the autoandrophobic males having sex with men and then being uncomfortable with it, is that because they aren't really attracted to men? For some of them, probably. Some of them experience like sort of disgust after the sexual encounter, like once they've released, so for some of them, yes.
Post-nut
But I
clarity, we
think,
can say it.
yeah, there you go, post-nut clarity. But I think for others, this discomfort, this internalized homophobia, what they're calling internalized homophobia, might just because it's the idea of two men and they don't see themselves as a male. And so I wonder if it is just the discomfort with their body more than it is the other person's body. And I say that because especially if we're trying to make the case in the females, and I recognize that female and male sexuality are very different, but if we believe that the Stone Butch experience is basically people with such severe autogynephobia, they are still engaging with naked women's bodies. And so I'm not sure that the autogynephobia or autoandrophobia always manifests out, or that it always applies to the self and to others. I don't know that we have that clarity.
We don't. Yeah, no, you're entirely right there, and I'm glad you said that. But this is where I think, like, we're talking about the difference in male and female sexuality here, and I think males have a much stronger disgust response, to what they aren't sexually aroused by, whereas I think women don't typically have that to such a degree, and so I think that could be another kind of make or break factor in this generalizing out versus. I don't think it is so much generalizing out so much as it is just general disgust at the male body. Some of that would be an extension. Yeah, I guess generalizing out. So some of that would be an extension.
Yeah, I mean, what about the trans women? The trans women who, the post-op trans women married to men, the autogynephiles, who it's like their autoandrophobia is sort of addressed with transition, and they're married to men. Now, I don't know that means that their attraction to males is the exact same type of attraction that a innately homosexual male would have to other males, or that a heterosexual woman would have to other males. But it's just like, it's really hard for me to believe that all of these people, because I think there are a decent amount of them, of AGPs with men, married to men. It's hard for me to believe that they're just like repressing this disgust the whole time.
No, I don't think they are. No, I think the AGPs who transition and marry men, they're also unlikely to detransition. And they're also therefore unlikely to try to kind of conceptualize their experience or their desire to transition as internalized homophobia, which seems to be specific to a detransition experience, is to frame it that way. Yeah. And so I think, there are, just like in women, in males, there's going to be different different experiences of sexuality. And I think a lot of the cases of the exclusively not asexual, that's the wrong way to put it, but a more sexological word would be allo, or I'm not pronouncing this right, but it's basically not having allo attraction, so not experiencing external attraction. And so their attraction is entirely about being female, and a male partner is going, if you don't experience external attraction, a male partner is going to be more effective at, living out your life as a woman than having a female partner would. And I think there is still, like, in a lot of the meta attracted, so AGPs with meta attraction to men, I'm sure that for a significant number of them, their attraction to men is very similar to the butch lesbian or the true trans or whatever FTMs, who are attracted and seek out exclusively relationships with women because they help them feel masculine by comparison, right? So the feminine is, magnifies the masculine in the self. And I'm sure there are plenty of autogynephilic males who are the same reason. They avoid relationships with women because they feel dysphoric in their masculinity relative to the women, right? So if they're in a relationship with women, they're not as feminine, as small, as graceful, as whatever, as their wife, whereas they could be with easily find a man who's much more masculine than themselves, and they will therefore not be feeling dysphoric about their maleness, or they'll feel less dysphoric about their maleness relative to the more masculine. So I think there's probably a lot of that going on with those who are seeking out exclusive relationships with other males. And I think it's really important to talk about how, when we're framing sexuality like this isn't a case of someone using someone as a full-time prop, because the attraction or the connection can still be just as legitimate and just as fulfilling and loving, etc., as one that develops from a normally allo attracted. Anyway, words are failing me. But hopefully people are kind of following what I'm saying here. Because you kind of take the long way to get there. It's like those relationships can still just be as intimate and as real as if it was started from a direct attraction, let's say.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and it'll be interesting. There's still so much more work to be done to understand this phenomena in a more granular way, because there is something that to me is very logical as to why autogynephiles and autoandrophiles would be very averse to having sex with people of the opposite sex, because as a male, as an autogynephilic male, sex with a woman requires your penis in that explicitly manly way, right? It's going to require you penetrating the woman, right? Not everyone has that, whatever. You guys know what I'm saying. And the same thing for an autoandrophilic woman with severe autogynephobia. Having sex with a man is going to require her to be received vaginally, or to receive vaginally.
Receptive,
and that is receptive. That's good. I can see how that is just so overwhelmingly hard,
dysphoria inducing, and
dissociative, and just not something that they can get over. But so it is interesting to really drill down, like, what are the different factors that you sort of have to have, right? What level of internalized gynophobia or androphobia, depending who we're talking about, what level of that do you need to have with sort of what level of like libido, right? Like, what lands you in the sweet spot for the males, especially because their sexuality is more rigid, what's that sweet spot for the autogynephilic males who don't experience that disgust response with other males, and don't feel overwhelmed by their attraction to other females? I don't know how clear my question is here, but it seems like there are all these little factors, right? That if you like tweak something in one direction or the other, that's what leads to these people who, as far as I'm concerned, aren't lying. Basically, that's like what I keep trying to hammer home is, I think so much gets lost in this conversation when we insist that people are basically lying or hiding some truthing or repressing some inner part of themselves. And so what it would be interesting to see what are the different factors at play that lead to these presentations basically of autogynephilia and autoandrophilia.
Yep. No, I like the way you put that. Yeah. Just, the different levels, different like personal experiences, like how much is the, disgust play, how much does, like positive experiences play, how much is, dysphoria versus euphoria, how much is, like there's just so many different kind of personal equations that go into the mix here. And that kind of brings us nicely to, like, I think the final, something that I really wanted to touch on, I think we both wanted to, is the difference in the culture today versus just 10 or 15 years ago. So what a lot of people are saying, it's not all AGP with the males, because this looks like more like a social contagion because just the explosion of numbers. When we do have to consider the social stigma that was male to female transition just 10 years ago, to now the social stigma that is being a straight white incel, let's say, versus being a trans woman. The cultural incentives have been flipped on their heads. Like it's a cultural reversal, essentially. So now the social incentive is to be queer in this way. This is where you get your social credibility, your college scholarship, your DE&I hire. Like there are social incentives to embracing a facet of your sexuality that you would have repressed or compartmentalized, however successfully, in a cultural context where this was much more frowned upon, where you'd be committing social, relationship, financial, professional suicide by doing this. For somebody to risk that, they have to be so compelled, so driven by their autogynephilia to essentially opt to become a social pariah in its service. So those are the people who were absolutely desperate. They had no other choice, as they would have understood it. Today, it can appeal to different young men. Again, those kind of, tweaking that personal equation. It's like, do you have a misandristic single mother? Do you does your, uber liberal culture bubble hate straight white men and praise and glorify, and everybody loves the lesbian trans women? Is like there are so many social incentives that
and it's not somebody. Totally. And it's not like necessarily nefarious or intentional on the part of the person choosing this, right? Because and it could be the people who several generations ago just would have only had a flicker of autogynephilia. They would have maybe enjoyed some of this cross-dressing, they in some way. But today they have this little flicker, and the other people who have this flicker are the trans people, and being trans, right, is more betterer in your social circle, right? It makes you more valid. It gives you oppression points, which allows you to like be a human in your circle. This is where I think a lot of the the rapid onset nature is partially true. These people are clinging on to the trans identity to explain their experience, basically. much younger and in ways that we didn't see generations ago. But it's not because this culture turned them trans or turned them AGP. It's because they're able to make that of their experience, when in previous generations, they didn't have that. It was either shameful and highly stigmatized, or just like truly unknown to them. Many of these men just like didn't know that other men even had this experience. And so I think that's absolutely correct. And it's also this the change in our social narrative around transition hit at the same time of like a really accelerated technological revolution, where we have social media and the internet, and people are able to connect with one another and share their stories at a much younger age, right? Where for the kind of classic prototypical AGP, he has these experiences throughout his life and then he represses them. And then they come back with a vengeance and he acts them out and maybe starts estrogen. And then he gets freaked out and marries his second wife and stops it and represses it again. And then 10 years later, after he's had his 3 kids, it comes back again. And so what we think might be happening is, for some of these younger guys, some of these younger males today, they're finding trans in their first experience of it, basically. Whereas in a different era, it wouldn't have necessarily gone away, but they would have managed it differently for longer. And that's also what I mentioned in one of our earlier episodes, is people get really fixated on like the age of onset of the gender dysphoria, and basically say, if you're not middle-aged, you're not AGP. And it's like, well, no, even the AGPs had this experience, this weird sexual experience at the onset of puberty. And for some of them, these more not so sexually explicit, but these experiences even pre-puberty. And so the fact that these people are coming out with their gender dysphoria and even feeling the gender dysphoria at younger ages is because they're not just kind of struggling with it on their own. They're being given the answer. And the answer is sort of true. Their experience is the trans experience, because the trans experience is the auto heterosexual experience. Yeah. And so I think that's like really important to focus on. And even with the technological revolution came the influx of porn everywhere. And so it's really easy for people to say that the porn is causing this, when what the sexologists like Blanchard and like Bailey believe is that actually they're finding out what they like in the porn, and they're seeing it younger than they would have seen it in generations past. And that is progressing their fixation with it. Like, these things are actually happening. But the people who are so taken by like she-male porn, let's say, for example, are people who that's satisfying some part in their brain. You know, it's itching something for them, or in feminization porn and visuals like that. And so, yes, it's true. These kids are being exposed to porn younger and younger, but like, so are all kids. And this was a realization that I just had recently too. And this is going to potentially be a little offensive, but there's, I think, an understanding among some of the sort of D-trans, what I would classify as auto heterosexuals, but these people don't classify themselves that way, where they kind of say, you know, I was like sexually abused or manipulated or groomed online. And I don't want to minimize that, because that obviously happens and was happening. But like, every kid who came of age on the internet was seeing weird shit online. And not for everyone, that didn't manifest in them strongly desiring to become the opposite sex. Like, we all got those weird pop-ups even before people had like pop-up protection and stuff on their computers. I remember being a young kid going into the AOL chat rooms, right? Like, it's kind of a fact of our society that everyone is kind of exposed to this from a young age. And that's not triggering everyone to identify as trans. And so it's, I think that might better explain why people are with the auto heterosexual experience of GD are feeling dysphoria earlier and more intensely in their life. But it's not the cause of their autogynephilia and their gender dysphoria.
Yeah, they get an explanation and kind of a narrative that the old, that previous generations never had, and where you just think, if you think something kind of makes no sense to your life, makes you feel kind of insane, you're not going to And there's nothing in the culture to explain it to you. You're just going to ignore it as best as possible. Whereas today you can anonymously Google what this means about you and then find all these forums and support groups that are going to tell you you're really a woman, etc. That's what they have now. But yeah, I agree completely. Yes, in MTF culture is pretty is especially terrible when it comes to grooming. Older men basically recruiting, like encouraging these boys to transition younger and younger, asking for photos, etc. It's in a lot of cases explicit sexual grooming. But the AGP is what got those boys to those forums in the first place. They had it already. But we need to understand what that experience is to protect these boys from being put in situations where then older men are grooming them into an identity that could be better understood or better handled. And that's I keep getting back to, like, it's the understanding the underlying condition is how we can manage it in a more healthy way, where if it's underground and not understood, the result is it being groomed into a full-blown identity, potentially identity crisis, etc., and going down irreversible medical pathways. But vilifying this experience is not the way to help these boys or men who also deserve to be protected and told the truth of their experience.
Yeah. And I think that's just something also that I wanted to really drive home, because unfortunately this applies to both sides. Our side, the gender critical side, and the TRA side, is like seeking knowledge for the sake of truth is a good enough reason. In fact, that might be like the best reason. People deserve to know the truth. People deserve an opportunity to make actual informed decisions about their life without having to worry about how this truth is going to make other people feel, without worrying if this truth is going to make people feel quote unquote unsafe. And like you said, Aaron, like there is actual unsafe behavior going on, grooming type of behavior going on, but it's not because they know the truth of what they're experiencing, right? It's because they're in the dark. It's because they're in the dark. And for 100%. Some of them, it's because they don't know, they've never heard of it. And for some of them, it's because they're in denial. But that denial is being facilitated by the society that we live in right now. And so the only way to actually fight this is to bring light to what's going on, to the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well put. I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover. How you feeling?
Yeah, I think we hit most things. As I always say, there's always more to say, but this won't be the last time that we talk about autogynephilia. But yeah, in the next week we're going to talk about autoandrophilia, which obviously it's the knowledge base of autogynephilia that we're basing our understanding of what the analog would be in females on. So this felt like an important episode to do first. But yeah, I think that's definitely the next step now, is to say, these are, we just talked about what sort of the different presentations of AGP can look like. And so next time we're going to talk about what we see as the different presentations of autoandrophilia.
Stay tuned. Check it out.
Thank you.
Until next time.